Hey Kyle, nice progress with your swing, man. This is really, really good stuff here. This was a challenging one for me because the thing that is plaguing your swing is so small and so minuscule that I could see how a lot of people would miss this. So I had to look really, pretty deep here, and here's what I've come up with. So I just want you to know it's not very far off, and the things that we're talking about here are relatively small, but could feel potentially big. And so here's where I'm going to go with it. First of all, I just kind of want to show you some similarities and some comparisons. But when you're thinking you're not swinging very well with the driver, or the results aren't where you want, and I put one of the best drivers of the world up here next to you, and you see that there's a lot of similarities to what you guys are doing, it kind of makes it easier to accept, some change, and that you're not really that far off. So then, to the naked eye, these positions look pretty darn similar. And I know you stated in your email you can't stop early extending, you can't stop, humping the ball as you put it, and you've got a bit of a two-way miss going on with the driver. But just looking at the similarities and the differences here, the biggest thing is there's a move that's going on here. We've got the lead arm starting to bend and break and separate, and we've got you pushing up off your toes right here, lengthening out this right side of your body. And it's important to understand what that does in your swing. And what those moves primarily do is that they change the curvature of your hand path, and they make your hand path move in an upward fashion through the ball. And that's important that it happens, but there's varying amounts of this in every swing. And you've got some things going on in your swing. You've got one thing going on in your swing that's kind of starting this domino effect. And that domino effect is, well, I need to push out of the ground hard off the ball of my right foot to lift the lead side of my pelvis, to lift the lead side of my shoulder, coupled with flexing the elbow, all in an effort to kind of curve that hand path up and to the left. So that's the first thing I want to call to your attention. I'm going to come back to the why here in just a little bit. But again, there's a lot of similarities in these swings. Probably more similarities than there are differences, and I'm showing you one of the best drivers of the ball on the planet. So a lot of similarities there. Now let's look down the line really quick. Again, a lot of similarities down the line. Pretty orthodox looking takeaway by you. I'll just get Rory to the top here. Pretty darn good arm structure and wrist alignments by you. Center of mass moves nicely back around behind you in transition. And in Rory's case, we see this squat and lowering of the pelvis in transition. Again, positions not greatly different, but again, we can see the early extension going on from you. If we just kind of watch how the front of your head kind of pulls back away from that red line, we can see the body's getting more vertical. And it's important for you to understand where that's coming from and what it serves in your golf swing. So essentially, if we dumb this down and we brought it all the way down here to the last parallel, and I'll bring Rory there as well. All right, so that's Rory's last parallel position and your last parallel position. And the thing that I want you to take note of is how much lower the club head is. And if I draw a line through kind of the center of his hands here and do the same thing for you, how much lower the club head is. It's back and down behind him relative to his hands in this position. Okay? Now this is important because this is basically setting up the 3D trajectory of the club head into the back of the golf ball. So from the center of the face into the back of the golf ball. Now, we know that the shallower and flatter we can get this thing coming in relative to the golf ball, the more dynamic loft we're going to have on the club, which is going to allow us to hit it higher. The more potential speed we're going to have because of the out of line condition between the center of mass of the club and the force we're putting into the handle. And more importantly, that lowered down sweet spot behind you is going to facilitate a rotary move with the body through the golf shot. And the higher that center of mass is, like in your case, is going to facilitate a stalling and a stalling of the rotation and more of a jump pattern, because if I want this sweet spot to lower down, I essentially have to be putting a force on the grip in an upward fashion. So when you pull up on the grip, the club head lowers down. And I hope that makes sense to you. So when you see yourself early extending way back here, this is an anticipatory move, and by you, you're starting to say, okay, how do I pull up on the grip to lower the club head down? And that's where the early extension stems from. It's from the fact that the sweet spot is not low enough in this phase relative to the ground so that you don't have to pull so up on the grip. Because there's two options. We can pull up on the grip, or we can pull the grip around the corner to the right. And the golfer that can pull the grip around the corner to the right is going to have a more stable club face and more angular speed to the club. And the golfer that's having to pull up on the grip to lower the club head down is going to be more stalled and flipped and jumping off the ground. Like if you see Rory over here with that sweet spot lowered down, you're not going to see a lot of jump. You're going to see rotation in him. You know, obviously he's using the ground, he's straightening his legs, but he's pulling that grip around the corner really, really fast. And so we have to go back and ask the question now, okay, why is your sweet spot too high at this position? And it all stems from one place. Let's throw these back up there again. I hope that you are familiar with a few terms that I'm going to use, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the lead wrist or the left wrist, and I'm going to use the terms flexion, which you see over here on the left, extension, which you see here on the right, and then radial deviation here and ulnar deviation here. Now it's important to understand that these movements are coupled together. So flexion goes with ulnar deviation and radial deviation goes with extension. So the more my wrist is extended or cupped, the more my wrist is going to be radial deviated or lagged, if you will. And in your case, you have a grossly strong grip with a lot of radial deviation. I wish I could zoom this in closer than I can here, but that's about as far in as I can get it. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see your hands are on the club completely different than Rory's hands are on the club. You've got your right hand cranked over on top of the grip. I can see the entire logo of whatever glove brand you're wearing there, and you've got a ton of radial deviation and extension in your wrist. Just look at this angle here from the forearm bone out this way. You don't see that with Rory. And you don't see that with John Rahm. And you don't see that with a lot of great drivers of the golf ball. You see this, what you're doing, with a lot of poor drivers of the golf ball. And what happens is when you create all of that lag, that extension and radial deviation in your grip turns into a lot of lag in transition. And so when I say lag, I'm talking about the angle between your left arm and the shaft increasing. Look at how close the shaft is to your head right there. Now you will never see the shaft, Rory's shaft, get that close to his head. And you will see that angle constantly widening out in the downswing. If I stopped you guys at varying positions in the downswing, the shaft is always going to be closer to you than it is to him. And the reason for that is the subpar wrist angle you've got going on here, where you've got too much lag and too much radial deviation, and too much extension in that wrist to be able to widen out that angle. So when this lead arm is here in the downstroke, parallel to the ground, I'd want to see that shaft more somewhere in this ballpark. And that angle should stretch a little bit in transition and get a little narrow, and then it should kind of widen itself out as you approach, later in impact. And that move right there, that ulnar deviation of the wrist, is essentially what lowers that club head down behind you. So if I stop both of you guys, if I can, when the grip is just outside the right thigh, it's probably about right there. Notice how you've already had to start bending your elbow, your right elbow, and you're already pushing really, really hard out of the ground, out of the ball of your right foot. And the reason you're having to do that is because this angle has been between the shaft and your lead arm has been preserved for so long that you've got to figure out some way to start curving up, that grip up, to get that club head to uncock at the very last minute and try to line up with that shaft. And you can notice how it's, the right arm is well outside the body, shaft's really leaning forward there, and that's a very, very last minute attempt at you pulling up on that grip to line that shaft up. So the bottom line is, you're going to have to, if you want to drive the golf ball better, you're going to have to reorganize this grip a bit. You're going to have to weaken that grip, you're going to have to get some of the extension out of it, and you're going to have to learn to feel a little more flexion in that grip. So I'm not going to tell you to go to the top of your grip and start trying to cast the club head out. That's not what we want to do here. It's important that you understand that if you reduce the amount of extension in your wrist, you're going to reduce the amount of radial deviation in your wrist. And what that does is makes the arc wider. And so if you look at a guy like DJ, who has a lot of flexion in his wrist, he basically doesn't have any lag. Now you're probably going to say, well, yeah, he does. It looks like he's got lag up here. He doesn't. He doesn't have radial deviation. The arc's wide. The sweet spot's being lowered down behind him. Now he's got the handle really far forward, but I can assure you he's hitting up on this golf ball right now. So that's where I would go with you. I would restructure this grip. I would get a much more neutral grip in there, a lot more ulnar deviation, and feeling that arc much, much wider, and that sweet spot at P6 lowered down sooner. So like right in here, you want to feel like the shaft is literally lowered down here. And you're not going to want to jump and pull up on the grip from there. You're going to want to continue to turn and rotate. And it's going to take some time to work through this. It was a tricky thing for me to spot, and it's going to be a tricky thing for you to implement. But this is the only way for us to improve the consistency of your driving. Hope this helps you. Shoot me a message if you have any questions.